You're listening to Unfiltered, real talk about sex and love with Ashley
and Heather. And today we're going to be answering the question, what is my husband learning in his group anyway? And it's interesting with this one because we hear this question a lot, and the questions that we've come up with that are connected to this general idea pertain mostly to women who are in a Betrayal and Beyond group, and then their husband is in a 7 Pillars of Freedom group. And so here's our first question. I'm in a Betrayal and Beyond group, and it's teaching me so much about emotional awareness and health. My husband is in a 7 Pillars group, and he's not learning anything about emotional health or betrayal trauma. Why is this? And this is really a good question because our groups for men and women tend to be around 9 to 10 months long. And the way that we had developed the curriculum specifically for a betrayed partner is going to look different than the way that we develop curriculum for somebody who struggles with compulsive addictive behavior.
Right.
And so that's just generally how it works. But part of the thing that happens when somebody struggles with addictive behaviors is that what we want to do with them is we want to get them to a place where they can experience sobriety and also sustain sobriety for at least like 6 months. And so that's why specifically in the men's curriculum, if we ended up adding too much other stuff about emotional health or how to be empathetic or what you need to know about betrayal trauma, which they need to learn about. At some point, they need to learn about it. But it's not usually something that's going to come up in those first 6 or 7 months when they're really trying to gain sobriety from pornography or masturbation or having affairs or visiting massage parlors or prostitutes. It really has to be focused specifically on that area of healing, and then we can get to the other part of, what they need to know about the pain that they've caused their spouse and those kind of things.
Right. And I think another way that it could possibly make sense, again, if you have somebody in your family who is, let's say, a heroin addict, and they're going to go to a 6-month rehab facility, we wouldn't put them in there and then sit down and say, okay, we need to start talking about how this made your daughter feel and how this, there's a little bit of that sprinkled in, but we really need to get them sober so that they're clear enough minded and they gain some awareness, and that they're able to think straight so that then they can deal with the second layer issues of the root issues of what originally got them there or what they're trying to numb out or what they're trying to avoid. And with sexual addiction, the hard part is that it feels like such a personal attack to the spouse because you have this lie of, I must have not been good enough, and that's why they're acting out sexually. And so that adds some complexity. But this was really challenging for John and I because I wanted to really control his whole recovery and healing process. And he saw it as control. He saw it as smothering, which were some of his childhood struggles,
Right.
But really what it was and what we both know now, I was grasping for safety. I was grasping for hope. And so if I saw him going to group and not making his calls and not working, it was not coming from a place of, I want to control you, you need to do it. It was coming from a place of, are you really doing the work so we can be in a better place, so we can have a chance to have a good marriage and that you'll actually heal? I want you to follow the program so that it can work because there's a good track record with these groups and, counseling processes. So, it often is coming out of a place of wanting hope and seeking safety.
Right. Yeah. And that's a great segue to our next question, which says, when or how will my husband learn to be empathetic and take responsibility for the pain he's caused me if it's not in 7 Pillars work? And this is an excellent question because for a long time, Pure Desire, that was the main tool that we used for men who were experiencing compulsive sexual behavior and really just to start them out on the path toward recovery and healing. But what we also know is that this is a 3 to 5 year process.
Right.
And that has been well established, not only in the Christian community, but also in the secular community with with Patrick Carnes, those kind of, who is a leading expert in sex addiction in our country. And so it really is one of those things that we would even then start to get this question from not only from betrayed partners, but also from the men who are in group, because they were saying, I've done 7 pillars 3 years in a row now, and it's great, but now I need something more. This also is evidence of the way that their brain is changing, right? Because we know that when somebody struggles with addictive behaviors, that there are things physiologically happening in their brain, in their limbic system, that is contributing to this overproduction of dopamine. But then as they get healthy and as their motivation for reward is different, then it's actually a process of retraining their brain, which when you have men asking for, I want more that has to do with emotional health, I want more that's going to even help me with self-care, because that's another thing that isn't really a core part of the 7 pillars of freedom. And so, which is important. All of these things are important, but as we also know in the recovery world, that when we try to work on too many things at one time, then we don't do anything well.
Right.
And so if we can get through that first 9 months to a year of establishing sobriety, then now we have a new resource for men called the Compassionate Warrior. And that one takes a man deeper into his healing, but it really does address more of the, how do I learn to be empathetic to my wife? And especially, how do I learn to take responsibility for my behavior? And how am I going to learn to be more emotionally aware? But then also, how am I going to learn how to communicate that to my spouse? All of those things are super important in the relationship in and of itself. And so that's why we have tools like 7 Pillars of Freedom, and we have now the Compassionate Warrior, which we'll drop the links for those into the show notes. But it's something that when you have betrayed partners saying, what is he learning? I want to know what he's learning. And really, because we encourage spouses that you're in these groups so that not only for your recovery and healing, but so you're learning the same language,
Right.
And so it sometimes feels like, I know I felt this way from my Betrayal and Beyond group and heard this from the other women of them saying, I can talk about my feelings in a way and communicate them, but sometimes I look at him and he doesn't even know what I'm talking about. And so hopefully this is going to help men to kind of catch up a little bit and then develop that emotional awareness as well.
Yeah, because I remember when I first suggested that John join a group for men, join a 7 Pillars group, he was like, he had been found out, like, let's say June, I think it was. And then by the time we found a new church, because I was praying like, God, bring us people, bring us resources that can help us. So it ended up being September that we landed in a new church that was starting their first 7 Pillars group. And so of course I wanted John to go. And because he had just been found out with his sexual addiction that he had been hiding for nearly 20 years. It was 20 years at that time. He felt this new sense of freedom. He thought he was healed and recovered because the secret was finally out. And so come September, when I say, you need to join this group, he's like, I don't need that. He's like, I don't have daddy issues. And I don't, it's like, okay, I don't need that. And a lot of the way he would say, oh, I looked at porn because I didn't want to bother you. You just had a baby, or, it's like he didn't mean to blame me, but he didn't know why he did what he did. He knew what he did was hurting me, but he did not know. And then by the end of the group, he's like, I have daddy issues, I have father wounds, and it was never your fault. And this behavior started when I was 15 years old, and I didn't even meet you till I was 30, so it definitely wasn't about you. And it just gave him new language. And then there came a point where he was feeling really free in his recovery. And I'm thinking, I hate seeing you this happy and free, because it made me feel like he's forgetting that this has caused me pain.
Right.
And so there was this point where we had to have this really honest conversation, and I showed him different tools out of my Betrayal and Beyond to say, this is how I feel. And he ended up reading a few books. One was Worthy of Her Trust, which we'll put in the show notes, and then Help Her Heal by Carol Jurgensen Sheets. those were resources where he was able to go through them and say, is this how you feel? Is this how my behaviors make you feel? And I would say yes, because he was just so focused on gaining sobriety, which was actually very helpful for our family. I'm over here focused on healing from the betrayal trauma. And then we needed to start getting to a point at the end where we're sharing with each other. But it's really hard to do that in the depth that you need to do it if you don't have a counselor to help you in the early stages, because John did not know where his stuff was coming from. And so it was really easy to land on me again, even though he had this addiction 15 years before he met me.
Yes.
And so that's why we say sobriety for him first, betrayal, healing, and recovery, so she can stabilize and calm down. And then you can come together and say, okay, now we need to start integrating this in this kind of like third leg of the stool. And the beauty of having a counselor or a clinical team, and that's something unique we do at Pure Desire, is we do have a male and female clinical team that will work with husbands and wives, is they can help kind of start weaving a little bit of that in and navigating that a little deeper earlier on, if that's, what's needed. Okay, so last question we have is, my husband has been in group for months and I'm not seeing any changes in his attitudes or behavior. Can I talk to his group leader to find out if he's actually doing the work? The short answer is not advised. But as a betrayed spouse who also wanted, and maybe did a few times, talk to his leader, what that can do, so what I discovered, if I can say, learn from my experience, is that when I would talk to John's leader, and we didn't know, like back then, we didn't have the teams we have at Pure Desire now to help us with guidelines and groups and those kinds of things. But what that did was, it can make John feel like, okay, now I can't be fully honest in my group when I'm trying to figure out where all of this stuff is coming from, because Ashley's in communication with my group leader. And so it was really important for me to realize he needed a safe space to completely like unpack. And then I needed to trust his leaders in his group that they would say, hey, this sounds like a relapse. You probably need to confess this to Ashley, and you guys need to pull out your plan that you have in place, your recovery action plan that you bring out after relapse. And so I would say, if you're not seeing any attitudes and behaviors changing, instead of going to the leader, first talk with your husband.
Yes.
And say, why aren't you doing your phone calls? It doesn't seem like you want to be in group. You're not sharing anything with me. And we don't necessarily want husbands and wives to share their answers out of their material with each other, because that could be really harmful and not helpful. But we do want them to come home and say, I had an epiphany today. I realized that every time I go to a family reunion, I end up relapsing. And those are the kinds of things where it's like, you're starting to connect the dots of your own story or why you do what you do. Or maybe you come home and say, I just realized how much you're having to work on your healing because of my addiction, and I want to apologize for that. Like, maybe you're having these revelations in group that you're able to bring back to your spouse. But what I tell women when they call is, first talk to your spouse. If they're saying, oh, well, my leader doesn't do that, maybe encourage your spouse to bring it to their leader and say, hey, why aren't we using the recovery action plan? Why aren't we using these tools? Why aren't we making phone calls? So have them go to the leader. Or if it's, yeah, we do that in group, I just don't think I need it, I just don't think I want to do it, then you have a different conversation. And so I'll either say, try to talk to your husband, have them talk to their leader if they're not using tools. If that doesn't work, you can always join an online group at Pure Desire, because then you're going to get all the things that you should be getting in a group. And in that group situation, if the leader's not doing something, then you have a team you're able to reach out to and say, hey, my husband's part of this group and they don't do phone calls, or they don't, and then let us handle, because we do want all of our groups to get the full experience online, and we oversee these online leaders. So it's easier for us to reach out to that leader and say, are you guys doing phone calls? Are you using the recovery action plan? And make sure that everybody's getting what they expect to get out of a group. If your husband is just unwilling to do the work, or he is doing all the work and you're still not seeing changes, then you definitely want to look into getting a counselor so that they can really figure out, where are we stuck? maybe we need to slow the process down. Like you said, maybe we need to work on one thing at a time. Maybe the group process moves too quickly. Maybe there's some shame or like a blind spot keeping him stuck, or maybe there just needs to be that accountability with the counselor where they both can come and say and share both sides of the story and then get that outside mentorship.
Yeah, that is really good. And I also think that there's a piece of this that can be really difficult for sure the betrayed partner, but also even the spouse who's in recovery, is to trust the process. And you hear that a lot in recovery settings, because what we want, all of us, we really want an immediate fix, and it's not going to look that way.
Yeah.
There's no such thing in recovery as a quick fix. And so it could be that maybe your spouse is doing the work, but it just might not be impacting his behaviors yet, because we all go through that process of we have to change our behaviors because we need to change our thoughts, because we need to change our feelings. And there's a process to that. And so it can be really difficult, but we always encourage each spouse to, focus on your own healing, because really if you get too focused on what the other person is going to do, it could derail you in a really unhealthy way. And so trusting the process, even though it's super difficult when you're in the midst of it, is always a great plan.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being part of the conversation. And if you can think about it, we should be talking about it. So send us your questions at unfiltered@puredesire.org. And if this conversation was helpful to you, then make sure to subscribe and share it with a friend.